Thanks so much for joining today's webinar, where we'll discuss the hidden gem of the SQL repository. Our agenda for today includes a brief introduction to SQL and to the repository itself. We'll talk a bit about the repository, and then I'll go into a live demonstration and show you around a bit. And we should have some time for question and answers. My name is Brandy Lulling, and I am the team leader for the BI support team. I've been with Fortra for over 18 years now, and most of those years, probably about 16 of them, I've been working with our BI tools. And I came from a system administration background on what was then AS400, and making the jump to the database world was a challenge, an exciting one, but it was a challenge. But I can tell you firsthand that Fortra's SQL made it easy for me to make that transition. So what is SQL? Well, it is a powerful yet user-friendly BI tool that allows your IT and business staff to create and deploy exciting reports with just a few clicks of the mouse. SQL provides true data empowerment. Whether you're creating views or pivot tables, executive reports, scripts, dashboards, whatever you need to create, you can do so very easily over the data from your local IBMI system, a remote IBMI, or any number of other databases. Now your staff can create, if you give them authority to do so, access, deploy, and analyze your live data using our Windows interface called Viewpoint, or they can easily access the data through a browser using our SQL web interface. Now, if you have users, like a lot of us do, who prefer working with Excel, we do have a solution for them too. We have a very easy to use, very intuitive Excel add-in. Well, let's get into the SQL repository. What is it? Well, starting a few years ago, probably about 4 or so, we introduced the SQL repository to offer a more modern, easy-to-use interface within both Viewpoint and the SQL web interface. You're going to hear me throughout the session refer to host mode, which is what we have dubbed our traditional interface, the one that you're all familiar with, and repository mode, or, pardon me if I do so, repo mode. And that's the newer interface. With repository, your views, reports, dashboards, and so on are still saved on the IBMI, but they're now also being stored in the IFS, which makes for a much more familiar web interface for your non-IBMI users. With the repository, we also have introduced multiple options for authentication, but don't worry with all of this. Whether you stick with host mode or convert to repository mode, the product itself is still the same and the one that you've grown to know and love. Let's take a look at a compare and contrast the differences between host, and again that's what we refer to as the current interface, or repository. So the first major difference is that in repository mode we do require an intermediary server, a Windows server. It doesn't have to be super robust. It can be a VM as long as we have a static IP address. But we do need that to help serve all the additional functionality that's available. Host mode, we authenticate using an IBMI profile and password. In repository, you can do that as well, but we open up to several other third-party authentication types, such as JD Edwards or Active Directory even. Traditionally, we follow the IBMI standard rules, right? We have to. It's a maximum of 10-character limit for object names and library names. They can't have a space. You can't start with a number, rules like that. Whereas for repository mode, because it's a more Windows-centric and it's stored in the IFS, there is no limit to the object name length. There's also no limitations. Your objects, your view names or dashboard names can start with a number. They can have spaces. They can be full text. You can write a sentence if you want, if that's what makes it easier for your users to understand what they're looking at or looking for. IBM Object Authority is used to secure SQL objects in libraries, as well as the opportunity to use some additional higher level security if you're in the host mode. That's through our product. Whereas in the repository, we still use IBM Object Authority, our advanced database security in the SQL product, but we also have some additional folder security that's very easy to set up and quite powerful. And it makes it very easy to secure multiple levels if needed within the product. Now, Viewpoint, as you may be aware, has a plugin to easily schedule your jobs through Robot Schedule or the IBM Job Scheduler, depending on if you have Robot Schedule installed or not. The repository, you can still use either one of those. You would have to define them manually. You would have to go into Robot or into the IBM Job Scheduler and set up your jobs that way. Or we do have a plugin for Automate Schedule through the SQL web interface version of repository mode. If you are using JD Edwards in your environment, in order to provide the environment and role for those profiles, you would have to set up a specific connection type through the SQL product. And it can be done. It's not difficult. It's just a couple different steps that you have to take. And you would have to do that you would have to access that data by connection. Whereas in repository, we have it more natively set up so that we support environment and role by profile. The repository does also support multiple types, multiple entries, so you can have multiple repositories within the same IBM I if you would like, which is especially helpful for companies that host others, or if you really need to keep things completely separate, maybe different security policies or what have you. You have the ability to log out and end your browser sessions, which is something new and unique to the repository. And there is definite improved performance through the browser, along with an updated look and feel. Now, we do also offer an updated licensing model with the repository because you can define users and designers, and they can be treated separately. All right, so with all of that being outlined, let me show you some of the differences. Don't worry, I'll get into a live demo soon and you'll be able to see probably a little more clearly. I know screenshots can be a little tough in this type of environment, so bear with me just a moment. Hopefully they're not too tiny. All right, so this is traditional Viewpoint. This is the host interface, probably something that you're all very familiar with. We can see up at the top, we can filter on the library and the object name and the object type. Over on the left, we've got our system name or names. You can see I've got two connections, one to Vaughn, one to Wisdom. And I've expanded Vaughn and I've got all of the libraries, my custom library list defined there. And then in the center section, we've got the list of object names. And again, it's the maximum of 10 characters, no spaces, and so on. Now, if we flip over to repository, we still have the filter option. It's just in a bit of a different spot. So current folder is where you're referencing now. And I didn't put a box around it, but over on the right on this same line, we have the apply filter object. So this is where you would go if you want to see just your views or just your tables or so on. Over on the left, we can see we have our Vaughn repository. And then under that, we've got folders, subfolders, sub-subfolders. And then in the center, we've still got our object names. And we can specify, we can list the types and different dates. Now you will notice that all of the object names start with a number here. They don't have to, that's just how I keep myself organized for demonstrations. You can name them whatever you would like. And as you can see, we have some rather long ones, invoice and order counts with a date range. That obviously wouldn't fly in host mode. The SQL web interface is a plugin or an add-in, if you will, to Viewpoint or to the SQL product, and it allows your users to deploy the data through the web. So you don't have to have Viewpoint installed on every PC, especially those that are just users that aren't going to be designing anything. SWI or SWI is a really good option for that. And it's designed to look and feel very similar to Viewpoint. On the left again, we have our library object and our type filters. And then in the center, just like Viewpoint, we have our object names. And also, just like Viewpoint, you can double click on any of these objects to display the results. You can right click to display or create output. Now, very similar to the Viewpoint repository mode, we have the SQL web interface for repository. A little bit different of a look and feel, but similar again to Viewpoint. On the left, we've got our repository listed, folders, subfolders, and so on. And then in the center, just like in Viewpoint, we can see the object names. Now, this particular user, as you might be able to see in the upper right-hand corner, I'm logged in as Demo. Demo has several security options assigned to it. And I'll show you in just a minute when we get to the live demo. You'll see that on this particular server, we actually have two repositories, one called Vaughn, one called Wisdom. But Demo doesn't have authority to the Wisdom repository, so it just doesn't even show up. It's not even going to be an option that then your users have to they can try and log in, nothing like that. It just doesn't even appear. Same with some of the folders in the Vaughn repository. You'll see in just a minute that there's tons of folders, but Demo only has authority to see the subset. All right, so before we get to the live demo, I want to talk briefly about configuring the repository. So the first thing you need to do once you have your server class PC carved out is to install the SQL web server software onto that. And right now we're shipping version 3.0, but version 3.1 will be coming shortly. Once it's installed, then on that same server you would need to define your authenticators. The one that I have highlighted is the one that we've been using. It's an IBM I authenticator, but as you can see, we've got Active Directory, SQL Server, other IBM I systems, and so on. Once those two steps are done, you go over to your IBM I, enable repository mode, configure the hosts, create your credentials and some users, and then the next two steps, the create repository and configure data sources, those can be done in just simple clicks of a mouse, and they can actually even be grouped together and done at the same time. And the last option, the add security settings, this one's going to take a little bit longer. The first group here on the page can be done probably 5 minutes or less. But as like adding security to any other product, the setup is going to take a little bit longer, but it can be done in stages, depending on how you want to roll this out. And once it's there, it works extremely well, and then it's really easy to maintain. So let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a bit of the repository live. Okay, so we are now in Viewpoint. You'll see that there is a login for the SWS or Swiss server. I'll go ahead and log in as Demo, and I'm going to authenticate using Vaughn. However, I do have several options available, including Active Directory, JDE World, a local connection, and there's even more options if we had created an authentication provider for those. I'm going to stick with Vaughn because it's got a nice easy user ID and password. I'll connect to the repository. And you'll see, just like in the screenshots, we do have our folders and subfolders and so on. So here we are in Viewpoint. It feels a little bit different, but on the other hand, it's still similar. Right? Our object names are still in the center. You double click on them to display the results, just like you're familiar with right now. Any variables that you've set up will work the same. If it's a grouping view, you can use the show details drill down and the regroup drill down. We still have subtotals available and so on. All options are going to be the same, except there's not a plugin for the scheduling. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied there. So when you take the option to email or print, we don't have an option as a plugin to Robot Schedule or the job scheduler. You would have to do that manually. But you can still schedule them. It's still command driven. If you go to the new tab or the recent tab, all of that is going to look the same. So now I'm going to flip over to the SQL web interface. You'll notice up at the top, the URL is not the IBM I, it's actually our SQL web server, so that intermediary PC server that we had to carve out and install the software onto. Again, the same type of login options, whatever you have available as your authentication providers in Viewpoint, you'll have available in the browser. I'm going to log in twice. First time we're going to do demo, and then I'll go back out and log in as administrator so you can see the differences and where you would go to do some of that configuration. Very similar look and feel to Viewpoint. Our folders and subfolders and so on are over here. You may notice that we have output folder. I kind of skipped over this in Viewpoint because I wanted to save it for the browser. One of the big features of using repository mode is you can save your PC output to the repository. Keep it all in the same place. You don't have to archive it somewhere else or use another network location. It can all be stored in the IFS in the repository. Then if you need to refer to something or open it up again, you can do so. You can call that right from the repository. Again, to display, it's just a double click. If we have any prompts or variables, you will get prompted for those, just like you would using SQL Web Interface or Viewpoint outside of the browser. So we can select one or all of the options here. I'm just going to leave the defaults. So, if you're not familiar with dashboards, here's an example. I've got everything in green because it's Fortra colors. You can see we've got all kinds of different options. Digital gauges or summaries. We've got a whole plethora of different types of graphs and charts. And we also have some action buttons. So if I were to click on one of these, something else would happen. This particular one, available credit by customer, would show a new result. And then over on the bottom right, this is just details of a view. We can also include tables and reports and so on. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that, and then I'm going to log out from my demonstration ID and log back in as admin. Just want to show you how different things look as administrator. You'll only need to come in here to do some configuration, whether it's the initial setup or you need to add restrictions or the security. You can see, I pointed out that I have access to Vaughn when I'm logged in as demo, but here's the other repository, Wisdom. And you'll be able to see here, using a credential, which just passes a user ID and password in, that there are many folders that the demo profile or demo credential doesn't have access to. So again, if you don't have authority to it, you just don't even see it. If we look at the restrictions for the Wisdom repository, you'll see that everybody has access except the principal or the user ID demo and viewpoint. So anybody else that were to log into this same URL, as long as they're not demo or viewpoint, would be able to see the Wisdom repository. As you're first configuring repository mode, the first thing you need to start with are your IBMI hosts. From there, you can import your repositories and SQL host entries, or you can do them both at the same time. And then you also would be in here to create your credentials and your users. The credentials can also have restrictions on them so that random users, for example, do not have access to log in to a profile or with a profile that they shouldn't. This is a good example. We do have CUSEC offer listed under a credential, and if you log in as CUSEC offer, then you can see this credential. If you don't, it won't even appear for you. If you wanted to schedule jobs and have them run through the browser, you most certainly can do that. Again, you can do it through IBM Job Scheduler or Robot Schedule if you have that installed. Or we do have a plugin for Automate Schedule, and that is a web-based scheduler. So to create a job, you would just log in, take the option to create job. It's pretty straightforward. You just tell it where you want the job to create, what kind of output you want from it, and where you want that output to be sent. All right, so that is a brief overview of the repository. Hopefully it didn't go too fast. Hopefully you were able to get some tips and tricks out of the demonstration there. If you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to reach out to support. We are very happy to help at any point in time. If you have questions now, something that's on your mind, please go ahead and feel free to chat them in. I do see a couple questions have been sent in, so since we have a few minutes left, might as well go ahead and cover those. So the first question, and thank you so much for asking these. All three of these look like really great questions. I've been using SQL for a long time. How do I transition to repository mode? Great question. There is a command that we have available, and I can show it to you here real quick. It's convert SQ to IFS. This command, you specify either one SQL object, or you can do all of them in a specific library. What type of object, whether it's a view, a report, or so on, or all of them. And then you tell us which folder in the repository you want it to go to. Where do you want these saved? The option down here, the object text for VPT file name, is kind of a nice one in my opinion. What we're going to do is take the object description. So, maybe you remember if you're saving a view in Viewpoint, it has properties or a description that you can add. With this convert command, do you want whatever's in that description to be the new object name? Yes or no? If you say yes, we'll use it as the object name. If you say no, we'll keep the object very similar to the name you already have. This runs depending on how many objects you're converting at once. I've done hundreds. It's taken like a minute or so. So, I mean, it's a pretty quick process. So that is how to convert, so you don't have to do everything manually. You can always open up your individual objects and do a save to repository instead if you'd prefer to do it that way. The next question: can a few people use repository mode, and the others stay in host mode? We highly recommend against that strategy, just for ease of use. It'll become very complicated down the road for you, I think, determining who's using what, maintaining both the host objects and the repository objects. During transition time, so if it is something you are looking at moving to, we do have a way to have both turned on, so you don't have to be, line in the sand, boom, we're on repository mode now. You can transition. But once that is done and everything's tested, we do highly recommend that you switch to using just repository. And looks like we've got one more question right now. What does this mean for my scheduled jobs? And that's a good question. Your scheduled jobs actually, depending on where they're scheduled, might need to change. The commands themselves might need to be different. It really just depends on how you have them set up right now. Instead of the execute command, you can use execute VPT so that it points to the repository object instead of the user space object. But the rest of that command is going to be exactly the same. So it's just a matter of changing that one parameter. All right, I don't see any other questions right now. But if anything comes up, because if you're anything like me, we'll hang up off of this meeting and then it'll be like, oh yeah, I should have asked that. So don't hesitate to reach out to support. You can reach us several different ways. Through the community portal, you can create a case, or you can email us or give us a call. All right, just a quick thank you. I appreciate your time. The last 30 minutes or so spending that with me. I appreciate your attention. Hopefully you found this interesting. I personally love repository mode. Something you had to grow to love when it first came out because it was so new, but it works so well in the security options and other features that are available. And again, just the more modern look and feel is really kind of snazzy, to use a technical term. So again, hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to talking with you again in the future. Bye-bye now.